this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I create a quick painting, almost like a quick color study, based on the two photos that you see below. Now, the photo on the right is the literal landscape that I'm going to be basing it off of, but the photo on the left is a completely different subject matter, and it's actually the lighting that I want to apply to the landscape. So I'm using these two photo references to see what happens. And I will say that this exercise is a wonderful exercise to get your creative juices flowing, to just kind of play around, flex those muscles, warm up those muscles, and just a really fun way to practice how you can invent lighting in a way, kind of inventing lighting, but seeing how you can get creative and not just copy a photo completely, but to kind of use practice how to take reference to apply to your own paintings. So it's almost like these little baby steps that you can take, right? So you can see right now I'm just sketching out my quick composition just to get the shadows and the lights. Now you can see that in the left reference photo of the boats, what I really like is how the setting sun is just hitting the tops of those boats and everything else is in shadow and quite dark. The contrast is beautiful. I actually took that photo, so I saw it and it was awesome. And I really want to capture those grays in the sky as well. Now, changing up the lighting is not as easy as just color picking from the photo that I want to take the light from, right? So I can't just color pick from the bottom left photo because the subject matter is different. Ultimately, the way the light reflects off of the material is different. So it's not as easy as that, right? I have to know how the temperature of light interacts with the colors that I see in the landscape that I'm actually painting and estimate from that. So in the beach photo, right, we have a lot of logs and wood and kind of dirt in the foreground. And so I know that in a setting sun, I could probably push a little bit of that cooler ambient light hitting the foreground, which is kind of what I'm doing now to get a quick feel. And also the hill on the right? That's going to be in shadow now. In the picture right now, it's in light. So I'm going to have to think, okay, how does that hill look like in shadow while in sunset, right? It's going to, because it's in shadow, the value is obviously going to be darker, and it's going to have some purples and blues mixed into that orange, yellow, orangey earth tones. So basically, you're kind of mixing the complement of the color into the dirt tones, and it's just going to be kind of a more desaturated yellow-orange is how I look at it, right? So color is very intuitive, but sometimes it can almost be like maths, not in the boring sense at all, but not exactly 1 + 1 = 2. I don't mean that, because with colors, there's so many different infinite ways to interpret them. But sometimes you can simplify the way you choose colors by thinking how when colors get desaturated, how they become warmer or cooler, and how they can vibe with their more saturated counterparts. So that is all what I love to do, and that is what I cover in my mentorships at Sentient Academy, as well as my own upcoming on-demand courses on my website. So now you can see here that just by adding a little bit of mist to separate the midground rocks from that big rectangular background rock, I've already created distance, right? So I've created depth and distance and layers of midground, foreground, and background. So that's how you can really utilize things like fog, and ultimately it's really just value, right? So I'm just making the value a little bit lighter at the base to get that feel of kick of dirt, the kick of the air, just illuminating the bottom. And that is a really nice way to get depth in your painting. So now I'm starting to block in the light. The vision I have for this is that I have the strong vision of this rock just being graphically lit by this warm yellowish light, and it obviously is the focal point of my image, right? So you're gonna find that I'm gonna play around with the temperature, the saturation of the light. Everything has to be keyed accordingly, right? Because if my light is too saturated and everything else is, too dull or too dark, it might look funny. So I'm constantly not just choosing colors that I feel, but choosing colors that work with all the colors around it, because colors exist in relationships. You can't just isolate a color and be like, that's the color I want to put down, and not take into consideration all the other colors around it. Now I'm using masks, as you can see, to clip my layers onto certain shapes. So I have the shape of the giant rectangle rock, don't know what else to call it, the big rock. I have that on a separate layer so that I can clip my light to it, and I don't have to worry about it affecting anything else. And that is a really fun, easy way to organize your layers and to organize your shapes. And I'm also bopping back and forth, and you would know this, that I do this if you see in any of my other tutorials. I like to work on a painting holistically from all angles, and so I think it also is partly boredom. And so I will get bored of one area and jump to another area, but this helps me build up the painting as a whole. So now I'm thinking, okay, what if there's a reflection in the water that I could utilize to create more contrast and interest in that area? It might not make complete sense, but I'm also referencing the image, my lighting reference, right? And you can see that slight reflection in the water. I just zoomed out, so it's very hard to see. And by the way, I do paint this small usually. So you'll see that I hardly zoom in because I want to be able to see the big picture. Now, the other good thing about painting in separate layers is that you can scale everything, right? And all these are really easy tricks to repurpose or recompose your image without having to start from scratch. So I'm thinking, what if I made it smaller to imply even more depth? Composition's not amazing right now. It's kind of basic, but we'll see what we can do. There's still a lot we can do. But because this is a color study, I'm not focused on detail per se. I'm focused on finding a nice balance of shapes and texture, a nice balance of contrast and value, and also in temperature, right? So it might look like there's a lot of grays, but they don't feel gray in this painting because there's so many other colors around those grays that those grays take on a life of their own. And that's a little trick called simultaneous contrast that Johannes Eaton talks about. When you have a gray next to another color, that gray will want to take on the attributes of the complementary color. So if you have a straight up gray of a same or similar value to a more saturated red, that gray will actually start to feel like green. And that's a really handy trick that I keep in the back of my mind pretty much all the time when I'm painting. Now you can see the brushes I'm using as well, right? I'm using very simple brushes because again, I don't want to get caught up in, oh, what does this brush do? What does that brush do? I'm timing myself actually to about 20 minutes or less. And if you do a lot of these, I guarantee you will get fast. So fast. Sorry, that didn't make sense. You will get better so fast. So the whole point is consistency, right? Consistency and not complacency. Consistency, not complacency. I was trying to think of another C, but I couldn't think of it on the spot. So now you can see that I've actually merged everything, which is what I usually do. I'll have everything on layers, and then I'll get kind of tired of dealing with all the layers. So then I will merge everything. And then what I really like to do is just use different elements of my painting to cut into shapes. So I can use a sky to cut into the rock. I can use the water to cut into the foreground land. That to me is the most similar to painting with traditional paints. And I paint in gouache because, when you're painting with traditional paints, you don't have multiple layers to deal with. the benefits of Control Z, you problem solve, right? All on one layer. By the way, that's what we did on Loving Vincent as well. I was one of the artists who worked on the oil painted film, and we painted all in one layer. So this is something that I'm quite used to. And I think it's just a great way to problem solve. So if you're someone who needs a lot of layers, that's not bad at all. That's, very good. You're very organized. But once in a while, try to switch it up a little bit and try to merge everything and see, how you can build your way up. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but with more and more practice, you might just grow to love it. Now, even though I've merged things, it's not, all set and irreversible. I can use the lasso tool, Control C, Control V, and separate things back into different layers, right? So that's why I'm not really worried at all, because with Photoshop, it's very forgiving. And I am painting this on Photoshop. So I have no idea what I'm doing right now, but I think I'm trying to figure out a more pleasing light shape. And just playing around with some shapes more. So I thought, didn't really like what I had before. Let's try something a little bit different. So I just put that light shape on a new layer. Now by light shape, I mean the plane of that rock being hit by light. And I will say I kind of cheated this maybe a little bit. The light is coming off screen, behind me, the viewer who'd be looking here, and just lighting the top of that rock. So I am cheating it a little bit that way. It might not make complete sense, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just a quick study to see how far we can get. And that's kind of the whole point of this video. So hopefully by seeing me problem solve and thinking about my design choices, my color choices, this is helping you to maybe think about how you can approach your own paintings in your own way. I'm just happy to show my process, as it's always evolving. And I think it's a great way to challenge yourself. So right now, I'm just trying to find these more interesting shapes in the ground. And you can see that I've also smudged as well in the foreground, maybe a little bit too much. And I just want to briefly talk about edges, because edges is something that I think can be overlooked and is something that can really make or break your painting. If you have lost or soft edges in the wrong place, it can confuse the viewer and create elements of depth that you didn't mean to, or just confuse the illusion of depth in your painting. And if you have hard edges in the wrong places where it's supposed to be softer, that can also be very jarring as well. So even in a study as small and quick as this, I am thinking about edges on top of everything else, right? And I think that's what, as you get better as a painter, you just start to think of all those things simultaneously, and you also know immediately when something doesn't work out. I won't say always immediately, because sometimes I don't see things, and then afterwards I'm like, how did I not catch that? Oh my goodness. And so I'll say hopefully you can spot things almost immediately. But you can see that places near the edge of the canvas where I don't want the viewer to lock in as much, I have lost the edge there just to play around. But the parts where I want the edges to be crisp is the area that you're probably being drawn to, aka the center of the canvas. So I am definitely thinking about that as well. And you can see, just going back into color, that there's really not just one kind of gray that I'm putting down, right? I'm putting down cooler grays, warmer grays, purplish grays, bluish grays. And that's actually what makes this painting feel harmonious, is because grays are harmonious. And I talk about this a lot in my mentorships at Sentient, and also in almost probably all my YouTube videos regarding color. Do not overlook grays, because they are the secret sauce to your painting, right? Now what I'm doing now is just adding a few harder edge shapes. Now they're just shapes to me. I'm never really rendering anything. All I'm looking at is as a contrast between harder edge shapes, softer edged shapes, And also, how I can use brushes to add in texture just a little bit. Because sometimes it can be very easy to overdo texture as well, right? It's kind of the same thing as edges. You put texture in the wrong place, that can, I guess, kind of disrupt the painting, or you don't have enough texture and maybe the painting's missing something, right? So it's kind of about finding that balance. So now you can see I'm zoomed in just to kind of see how, the lighting is really working. And I really like that vibrant yellow. So I think I might color pick that yellow. I can't remember. But I just love, I don't even think I edited this photo actually, and I just love how it's actually like a cooler yellow. But I'm taking a graphic brush now, 100% opacity, my favorite block and brush, and I'm using that to just add on these crisper shapes, finding a pleasing shape to add on, to build up from my shapes below. And I think by adding those slightly harder edge, crisper shapes, it just creates this illusion of like, yes, the light is hitting the top of that rock. And it's all because of the comparison relationship of edges and temperature and value. So all those things working together. Now I kind of like the rock shape more. It feels like the light is hitting that rock. It feels strong. It feels powerful. I've thrown in some dotted texture in the foreground to indicate, the dirt and the grime and whatnot. And you can see that I'm using the lasso tool a lot. And I love using the lasso tool along with the gradient tool to kind of extrude, in a way, these shapes and lift some shapes out. And I've just gotten fast at using the freeform lasso tool to carve out the shapes that I want. So because I usually paint on one layer, I just use a lasso tool to affect the area that I want. And I can use a gradient tool or just, any brush to just fill in that shape. Now, the last thing I'll do is play around with adjustment layers. An adjustment layer can be a really powerful thing to push your painting just that much further a little bit. Maybe push the contrasts, some color temperatures. And right now what I'm using is curves and color balance. And color balance just helps me push certain shadows and midtones and highlights towards warmer or cooler. And so I'll just tweak with it ever so slightly to make that 0.1% difference that to me makes a big difference, right? So I love playing with adjustment layers near the end of my painting. I'll just usually do good old-fashioned painting until the very end, and adjustment layers are kind of like that cherry on top where I'm like, ooh, let's see what I can push more. And I always toggle adjustment layers on and off to see if what I'm really doing is helping, because sometimes I will go too far and I realize that it's actually not really working and I like what I had before. So I always like to, they already come in separate layers, but I will not merge adjustment layers into everything else. So now I'm just trying some last minute tiny tweaks to see if I can maybe push the atmosphere a little bit more. So I'm just lassoing that part out because I want to affect the rocks behind, and I'm just trying to see if I want to add a little bit of mist, a little bit of fog. We'll see how that feels. And with things like fog and mist, I like to use a soft brush, right? So the soft brush or the gradient tool is going to give you that nice soft look where you can't see the edge of anything. So soft brush is definitely a staple for really getting soft transition between light and shadow and adding effects such as fog or mist. Now I'm using another adjustment layer, hue and saturation, to see if I can desaturate some places even more. But I'm not sure if I like that. So for what it's worth playing around, right? And the worst that can happen is that you don't use it, but it doesn't merge with the rest of your layers. So I was using a hue and saturation adjustment layer. But that is more or less my finished color study. So now you can see I'm putting that along with all my other studies that I did, which were really fun to do. I challenged myself to do different value keys, so high key, mid key, low key, and all of these were timed in 15, 20 minutes. And they're all inspired by different references. Most of them are taken by me. The bottom left one, the colors were inspired by William Rischel. So I had a wave painting of his, not a wave, an ocean painting of his in mind. And the top two are landscapes that are inspired by my trip to Germany with my husband. We went there for a honeymoon, and I just wanted to see how well I could remember the colors. And so I had a photo reference, but I largely kind of just pushed the colors from my mind. And the top right one actually is inspired by Andrew Wyeth, because I just really love his snow paintings. I was studying him recently, and I love how graphic and two-tone, almost black and white with this beautiful texture, like dark brown and white. And I just love his snow paintings and how simple they are, but also how complex they are. Andrew Wyeth is a wonderful artist to study. And so for all these images, I was taking different inspiration from different artists, from different photos, and you could do 4 in one day if you really wanted. So yeah, it was a really fun exercise. So here is the final image with my 4 studies. You can see that I'm playing with a variety of brushes. Everything is quite abstract when you look at them up close, but that's personally what I love about paintings. And the bottom right one is what I just demoed for you. And you can see, where I'm smudging my edges, hopefully a little bit more. I know that it was so small in the demo because I paint so small, but hopefully you can see that in all the paintings I'm playing with harder and softer edges, simple shapes, pushing the shadow colors when I can, balancing grays and more saturated colors, and playing with different value keys as well.